The first thing is to say thank you for having us between yourselves and lunch. So we will try to be a little bit different, and we'll try to actually use these inspirational leaders for ideas and thoughts that are not just down to trade and not just down to politics, but instead we want to hear about their experience. So we're very, very lucky. We have an investment extraordinaire, we have an educator, an arts activist, and we have a diversity disruptor today. And Simon and I are going to introduce them, ask them a few questions, and we're very keen to also hear from you on Slido. I'll start with Matt. So Matt McCooe is a venture capitalist. He's an entrepreneur, and he's the CEO of Connecticut Innovations. Now, Connecticut Innovations, for those of you that don't know, is the leading source of finance for Connecticut technology, consumer, and life science companies. I understand you have over 250 portfolio companies, 12 direct venture fund investments, and 500 million assets under management. So we'll hear a little bit about that. We also have with us, I see Tom distracted, so I'll change. Simon, we already talked about this. So if people are scared of France, Simon will be scared of me. Seema Hingorani, and Seema is a real inspiration. She's a powerhouse in the investment sphere. She's revolutioning the industry by creating opportunities and increasing representation and diversity. She's the founder and chair of Girls Who Invest, and we're going to ask her a little bit about that. But she's also the managing director at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. And now we have Tom. And Tom is Tom Healy, an educator and arts activist, as I said. He's a writer. He's an expert in arts and public diplomacy. Under President Obama, Tom served as the chairman of the Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board, and he led major efforts to transform and expand the US government's largest public diplomacy program to promote peace and understanding. Much needed, Tom. He also worked under President Bill Clinton and served on the first White House Council on HIV and AIDS. So with that fantastic panel, I will start actually asking Matt a question. So Matt, where do you see the biggest opportunities and challenges, I guess, in the new world, considering the very challenging global environment, geopolitics, etc.?
So from an investment perspective, Connecticut Innovations, we're a local fund. We're the most active investor on the East Coast of the United States of America, but we do invest globally. And so we've invested in Western Europe, we've invested in Africa, we've invested in Canada, and quite actively in Israel as well. And we talked about it a little bit today. But it's incredibly important for us that there be a transparent government, that the government doesn't do things that would surprise me. I don't like surprises. I don't like it when the Indian government changes how they're denominating their currency. We want to know that the government can be relied upon, and that the culture is one of honesty as well. I want to know that when I look the entrepreneur in his or her eye, and they say, I'm going to do this, and I will not rest until I've accomplished this set of goals, that I know that that's what they're going to do, that they're a little bit unhinged. Indra was saying yesterday, we're talking a little bit about work-life balance, and there's a lot of talk today in the U.S. and elsewhere, but when I'm investing in an entrepreneur, I'm looking for people who are not as focused on work-life balance. They want to have a healthy family life. But if you're a top 2 or 3 executive in your company, that is an incredibly important role and responsibility. There's a lot of jobs, a lot of families, and a lot of people in the community who rely upon you. And so I want entrepreneurs who take those responsibilities really seriously and who are willing to, sure, have dinner with their family, have breakfast with their family, but then go back to work and work the weekends, work nights. Indra, I think, sleeps 4 hours a day. And so, in venture capital, they talk about the jockey or the horse. I believe in betting on the jockeys, on the people. And so for us, I'm looking for a country and a set of entrepreneurs who have like-minded values to what we've talked about here today.
That's great. And we talked about this yesterday also. Someone made the comment that they pick people that want to win. And that's a really cool concept. And it's different to people that don't want to lose, but it's equally important. Now, not that I want to talk about your private financial affairs, Matt, but
that would be a short conversation.
But you have been very successful in business. Apparently, you were the co-founder of Eureka Networks, which actually sold for $110 million. So just talking about that, if you were to invest, if I say to you, not that I'm asking, but if I were to invest a quarter of your money, where would we put that wealth? What are the fast-flowing rivers?
Yeah, so, again, it sort of goes back to my first answer, which is I want to know who I'm investing in. I talked to Charlie Munger, so his name keeps coming up, but it seems appropriate. And his view was, I want to buy a company and I want to hold it for 15, 20 years. I want to bet on the CEO. I want to be able to sleep at night because I know that CEO is, as committed to this and to me as a stakeholder. And so I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to think about it. So I'm really focused on companies like Microsoft and Satya Nadella. Greg, I've come to know you. I think when Greg says, we're trying to we're about connecting people and we're building networks that connecting people. And I know Greg's commitment to Air New Zealand. I would invest in Air New Zealand. Where's Angus Blair from Outset? But I met with Angus a couple days ago at Outset Ventures. For those of you, by the way, who haven't been to Outset, please go. It is incredibly inspiring. It gives you a sense this topic is unleashing ambition. But Outset is a whole 55,000 square feet of entrepreneurs who are building incredibly interesting companies. And the ambition in the entrepreneurs who are operating out of there and their globally minded aspirations and the kind of people who are there. I mean, there are people from all over the world working in and around those companies. So those are the things that I'm looking to invest in. If I were to give one stock pick, I would say that the biotech index has been for over 1,000 days now. It has been below its high. And if you're betting on like a 10-year window, we're still in the very earliest innings on what we know about the human body, the human mind, the relevant technologies that are coming to the fore, be it AI or CRISPR, gene editing, really early days. And I would be betting on the biotech innovation globally and what we're going to do to cure disease here and elsewhere.
Fantastic. So life science. Now, Seema. As I said, she's a real inspiration, and particularly for those of us that are thinking diversity is not just a choice or a good thing to do, but actually a necessity. So tell us a little bit about Girls Who Invest.
Sure, thank you. So Girls Who Invest is a nonprofit organization that I started 8 years ago in the U.S. And I started it because as an investor for 28 years, but importantly, as the chief investment officer of the New York City retirement systems for a period of time. This is back in 2013, 2014. I saw few, if any, women on investment teams at hundreds of investment firms around the world. And at that point, I was helping manage $160 billion on behalf of 700,000 teachers and firefighters and police officers in New York City for their retirement security. So a great responsibility, a great privilege. And I have to say, I was shocked. Now, I've been an investor for a long time. I knew there were a few women, particularly those that look like me, investing, but I didn't realize how bad it was everywhere until I sat in that seat. And that included private equity investing, venture capital investing, infrastructure investing, real estate investing, stock investing, bond investing, everywhere. And we know that that's not good for business. I think we'd all agree, we've all read the same research, that more gender diverse teams get better outcomes, better business outcomes, better investment returns. So I just couldn't understand why our industry, which manages about $90 trillion professionally, globally, across asset classes didn't have more diversity of thought at the decision-making table. Because, you might have been successful the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in your performance and your returns that you're delivering for your shareholders, but I debate you on whether or not you're going to be as successful over the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years if you don't figure this out. And so a lot of the leadership in our industry, particularly the billionaire men, and there are a lot of great men in our industry, they all told me that the reason why they didn't have more women on their investment teams was because they didn't get resumes from women. So I've heard that a lot of times before, and yet I was willing to agree with them on that. And so I said to them, okay, how about this then? I will make you a deal. You tell me you can't find the women. It's clearly important that we figure this out as an industry. So I'll go find the women and you hire them. And they all looked at me and said, what? And I said, yes, that's the deal. So when I left that job, that was back in 2014, I wrote an op-ed article. I just wanted to get a conversation started more broadly about this issue, never actually intending to start a nonprofit called Girls Who Invest. So it was in that article that Bloomberg published, by the way. I wrote, here are the issues and here are the challenges of getting more women into positions as investors, but what are we going to do about it? And so that's kind of how I grew up. That's how I was born and raised. We don't just talk about things, we try to fix them. And so I wrote about, well, why don't we have something called Girls Who Invest? And we'll start young. We'll go to high schools in the US, we'll go to colleges and universities across the United States. And we will train them, mentor them, prepare them, guide them, send them off into our industry, but never let them feel left alone so that they'll become more senior, they'll help change a lot of the cultures, and they'll manage a lot of the money. Because that roughly $90 trillion I mentioned to you, women manage less than 5% of that money. In fact, it's more like 2%, and women of color, we don't even show up. Again, not good for anybody. And so how are we going to do this? Well, after I wrote that op-ed, I thought I was done. I was going to go back to my old life in the private sector. But I got overwhelmed with the response. I did get hundreds of emails from men and women in our business, college professors, business school professors saying, Seema, you got to do this. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute, you want me to start Girls Who Invest? That's so not what I was planning to do. But I'm clearly passionate about it. So I created a college summer program. And how did I do that? I went to the industry, a lot of our leadership, and I sat down with them and I basically said, I'm an investor like you, I don't know a lot about how you recruit talent, so tell me, what do you do? And that's when I learned, oh, Seema, we go to these 4 colleges to recruit talent, and we go to these 2-year investment banking programs, and I thought, that's what you do, no wonder you're having a problem with diversity. I realized our industry didn't want to do the work. I think we were kind of lazy. Because clearly talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. So I learned from them, and I thought, all right, I need to teach these young women technical skills because our industry didn't want to take the time to do that, it seemed. And then I went to a couple college campuses in the US, and I talked to a couple hundred college women. And I basically said, you're 50% of the population of these colleges. Why are you not going into our industry? And look, a lot of young women like me growing up in the US never knew what it was to be an investor. We clearly didn't know also that it was interesting, stimulating, rewarding, and impactful. That was a big one. A lot of young women said to me, Seema, we don't just want to make a lot of money, we want to make a positive impact on the world. And I said, well, so do I. And don't you realize you can do that as an investor? And not a lot of them believe me. I gave them some simple examples of how they could really change the world when you control capital, about the power and influence of that in changing the world. And then a lot of women who did know about our industry, what they knew was not so great, particularly post-2008, the financial crisis. And it doesn't help when you have movies out of Hollywood called The Wolf of Wall Street and shows on Showtime, which is a cable network called Billions. And so what they knew, they didn't think our industry was such a noble profession. And so I had to convince them of that, which wasn't too hard to do. So I designed a program where we train women for 4 weeks, and then we guarantee them 6-week paid internships at leading asset management firms around the world. And in the beginning, I had to twist arms to get these firms to hire these women, but I'm okay with doing that. And then, I had to go out and explain to these young women why this was an important thing for them to just even have as an option on the table as a career path. And in 8 years, I'm happy to say that we've put over 2,500 university women studying in the US through my programs in 8 years. They're all free, by the way. All the training is free. My parents came from India to the United States 62 years ago with $8 in their pocket. And so the last thing this was getting about, in my view, is all the privileged young women in the United States. And 2,500 women, 70% staying in the investment business, getting multiple offers from 120 firms now around the world hiring our women, and we have a wait list. And we got over 2,200 applications from university women to go through the program. So it's been spectacular, and I think it's a model that we could use across the entire corporate sector. It doesn't just need to be in financial services.
Yeah, and I have seen some of the feedback that Seema gets, which is outstanding. I'm sure it's not easy, but it's what we all need to do, right? Push a little bit uphill. Tom, welcome to the panel. And as I said before, Tom has a slightly different perspective. He doesn't describe himself as a businessman. Now, I was saying to Tom before, but you're hugely relevant to business, because you can tell us what do you think the next generation wants, what drives passion, what people want. And that's relevant not only to our need, to our workforce, it's also relevant to our customer base, etc. So what are your thoughts on the future?
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I think Greg has a great sense of humor in inviting me. I think, it's one thing to be a good friend of Indra Nooyi, but I thought after listening to a number of people this morning, including the trade minister, I grew up on a farm. I can still milk a cow. I can still shear a sheep, and I've done my share of apple picking. So, but really to talk about education, I'll just tell one thing that happened in a classroom that I was in last spring. And the teacher asked the class, what new exciting thing is in the world that we didn't have 10 years ago? And a girl raised her hand and said, me. El mundo me tiene. The world has me. And I actually think we need to think and talk about that resource of who the people are that we have. Very exciting opportunity.
Fantastic. And in New Zealand, I think we do, we're very well aware that it's all about the people, right? Simon.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great pleasure to ask you all, and perhaps you all might have a wee go at this question. I think it follows on very nicely from what you've said, Tom. About an hour ago, Silvana sent me a text message that said something along the lines of, Simon, this needs to be personally inspirational. And we've talked geopolitics and the economy, and we can do a bit of that, and I'm sure we will, but personally inspirational. And I think, Tom, you're a man for that, because you're a Renaissance man, and you rise to the challenge. When I got told off by Silvana for asking him, I just wanted to know what he wanted me to ask, and he said, make it really difficult. Here's my question. I think it does follow on from what you've said. Recently I was talking to Teresa Gatting in a podcast, and she was there yesterday, and that will be very well known to the audience as a trailblazing New Zealand female businesswoman. I think I'm right to say first CEO of a listed company here, female, certainly of our biggest at the time, Telecom. And I asked her something along the lines of, if you did it all again, would it be kind of all the same? And what she said struck me, which was fundamentally, no, it would be completely different. It would be absolutely in startups and entrepreneurialism. I wouldn't have done any of that kind of finance stuff, and it would be very creative. And so I suppose my question is a further entree into that thought around our youth today and the uncertain world but exciting world nevertheless they inherit, is what would your alternative career be? Not that I'm suggesting any of you are old, not that there's anything wrong with being old, but what would you do if you were starting out again? Would it be the same, or would it be quite different?
Tom, why don't you start?
Well, I wouldn't suggest to anyone that they try to become a poet. In that way, it helps find you. I did have businesses, and they all failed creatively, so to get to there. But, I studied in college a lot about educational philosophy, and there's a famous American pragmatic philosopher named John Dewey, and he said that education is not preparation for life. Education is life. And I actually believe that firmly, that we need the adaptability we're still going to need I'm only 62. I hope I'm here a little bit longer. The adaptability to not predict what we're going to be able to do and have the skills to do it. Today's the birthday of the great American humorist Mark Twain, and he said there were 2 days that mattered most in your life: the day you were born and the day you figured out why. And so the depth of those things, I think, is it stays with us forever. I may end up being an apple picker again.
Seema, do you have any thoughts about the same question?
So I don't know, I guess I would say that, so I come from a family of an engineer, who my father was, also an entrepreneur in the U.S. He was actually on the team that helped design the Verrazzano Bridge in New York City when he came to the United States in the late 1950s. My mom was an entrepreneur also in the U.S., having never worked a day in her life in India, although had a degree from college in economics, and built a residential real estate brokerage business in Norwalk, Connecticut, where I grew up, ran it successfully for 22 years, and helped other immigrant families like ours who weren't shown nice homes and nice neighborhoods because of the color of our skin and where we came from. My older brother and older sister are both the physicians in the family, and I thought I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. And, in the Indian community, even though all three of us were born and raised in the U.S., you're either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, and so I felt like I made the list. And yet I went to college thinking that, graduated college thinking that, and then I feel like I just happened to be lucky enough to bump into the investment industry, and then realized, oh my gosh, I don't want to be a lawyer, I want to be an investor. I don't want to go to law school, I want to go to business school. And it changed my life forever. So had I known that earlier, maybe I would have done things a little bit differently. But I was a psychology philosophy major at university, and I would never change that. And I recommend to every young person I ever speak with about these 4 years of university that you will never get back. And so study what you love, study something that will grow your mind and broaden your thinking and teach you critical thinking skills, and just do what excites you, because again, you'll never get those 4 years back, because really, if you learn how to think and you learn how to write, you can do anything you want to do. And I was always taught that growing up, and I really believe it. And I can tell you plenty of interviews that I've had with companies over the years, especially in the earlier part of my career, where many of them will look at my CV and they'd say, "What are you doing in this room? What? There's nothing on your resume that says you would want to be an investor, or you'd be good at finance, or you." And I would say to them, if I can teach you Martin Heidegger's existential philosophy in the next 20 minutes, you can give me an accounting textbook and I'll figure it out. And a lot of the firms are like, yeah, goodbye, see you later. And some of the firms said, okay, Seema, we'll take you up on that. And those are the people I think you want to work with, right? And so I've done my fair share then of being on the other side and interviewing a lot of young people as I built out teams. And I would absolutely want to find those kinds of people, right, who just are great thinkers, and then clearly great team players, and those that are thoughtful and also in how they treat their people and how you build teams.
That's great, Seema. And we'll touch in a few minutes on the need for upskilling or reskilling, because there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, what it means to us. And I actually agree with you. The broader your set of skills is, the better prepared you are for the future, for challenges, which we all have in all different aspects of life. You're not out of the question, Raj,
Okay. So I would be Michael Jordan. I'd go back and I'd be a professional basketball player.
Not just any player,
Michael Jordan. No, I saw, I don't know if Professor Freshwater is still here, Vice Chancellor from University of Auckland. But if I could go back, I would be an academic entrepreneur. So I would work with students in colleges. I would want to be one of the professors who got to work with you, Seema, when you were at Yale. I think it keeps people young. And the entrepreneur side of it is, I would want to be developing a cure for cancer, and I would spend 25 years working in a university lab with hopefully, massive amounts of funding from the National Institutes of Health, and get a breakthrough and start 5 companies along the way, and get to be an entrepreneur and start lots of companies and work with students. I think that's kind of the. Obviously, I've thought about this a lot. That's my dream job.
What about you, Simon?
What would I do?
Work with us at Girls Who Invest, man.
Right now, I feel I could be in showbiz, but
And an excellent job.
I suppose, what do they say? Politics is showbiz for ugly people. So there you go.
You have a talent for radio.
Fantastic. All right.
How about you, Silvana? You can't.
I would love to have like a host in a talk show, if people can understand my accent. Look, AI. We did touch on it, and there's a lot of talk about AI being scary. Now, it is a big challenge. It's a big revolutionary something. Any of you that want to start with what are the big opportunities that come with it, what are the risks or challenges that come with it, and how do we better face it? How do we prepare? How do we be ready for it? And Tom?
Sure, this is something I've been spending a lot of time thinking on. I am on the board of a freedom of expression group called PEN America, and the issues of copyright, of what artists and writers do, and the issues of deep fakes and the ability to manipulate language through algorithm and such, these are really frightening issues, as well as the whole question of what jobs get replaced by AI. Now, the exciting thing so far, what industry seems to be, is that there will be whole categories of jobs that get displaced. The largest category of job around the world is driver. Now, 25 years from now, there will be far, far fewer drivers. We just know that to be. What are those people, mostly men actually, what are they going to do? Well, the good thing with AI, we've already seen, is that for the millions of jobs that are already getting displaced, huge numbers of other jobs are being created. And as you were saying about how do we make the idea of education and growth to be lifelong, that there are easy ways to do these things. One of the feelings I had this morning, it's interesting and really enjoyable to be at this moment of new government and take politics and ideology aside from it. You can feel this optimism. And what's clear to me is that the future of education really depends on businesses being deeply involved in helping shape what it is. You don't want academics to really be giving us kids and young adults who are taught based on the supply side of what we think an education is. Instead, there really is the demand side of what you all know you need. And to feel it shouldn't be just a change of government saying we'll have a new 10-point plan of a different kind of education. It really is about the responsibility of all of us to get actively engaged and even do that in specific schools and specific ways, and think of your workforce as people who are going to need that kind of education.
And it's really hard to be open-minded. So I'm going to run a quick poll. How many of you, put your hands up, know how to drive? How many of you want to teach your children how to drive? That is bullshit. I'm sorry, but if only 2 people put your hand up, your line. I think all of you want your children to know how to drive, and we're just hearing that you shouldn't waste that time, but it's hard. Because we think it's important, and our reality is key. So it is really hard to be that flexible. Sorry, any other thoughts on AI?
I mean, I would just say one thing about certain things that, I know what Tom was saying a little bit about productivity and increasing productivity, where I would say to be really good at a math equation or a physics equation, that's where AI can really help. But when you think about interpreting the data, so crunching a lot of data, organizing a lot of data, but then interpreting it and analyzing it, that's a human thing, and I don't think that ever goes away. And I think that's where I hope our educational system in the US and around the world continues to focus on the humanities. I think we've been moving a lot towards STEM and getting STEM degrees, but to some extent, we need to be careful about that, I think, because we can teach our young people how to code, and that's really important, but eventually coding will be done by a lot of AI. And so I'm actually interested to see how many more universities and educational institutions keep English majors, philosophy majors, and again, the humanities, because interacting with people and learning how to do that well. Look at a lot of the Girls Who Invest curriculum I teach. It's not about just the technical skills, about how to understand accounting and read a financial statement. Clearly, I needed to do that, I felt like. But the other skills about how you dress in the office. A lot of these young people don't know because they've never done it, so we teach that. How to interact with people, how to read a room. When you go into a boardroom, there aren't a lot of women in these boardrooms yet. We're working on that. But how do you operate in a situation like that, particularly for a young person who doesn't have that experience yet? So I think AI is going to be great, and it is great for certain things, and we'll be able to optimize the time that we have, because we all have very little of that, I think. But then also we can't forget about the humanity part of it, and so I think that's important.
I'd like to follow up on that a little, if I may, because I so agree with Seema. We've talked a lot about innovation and creativity. The fascinating issue is that productivity growth is really in tension with creativity. Creativity needs to take time, it needs failure, it needs risk. Productivity needs, sameness and clarity and organization. And so I do think we'll be having the skills and benefits of AI that can do a lot of that automation. But I think I'd like to argue for the way businesses can focus on the creative act. And Simon, you began this by saying that our late governor in New York, Mario Cuomo, said that you campaign in poetry and govern in prose. I think we should look at running businesses and governing with more of the poetry. And let's just give one example. The Prime Minister said that he spent about $1 billion on advertising and promoting Dove soap. $1 billion is a lot of poetry. That is it's about how do you reach people and respond to them emotionally. It's so there is I think we dismiss too easily what we need in that sense of creative things.
That's a great point. And Tom is not biased. He has written 3 books on poetry. But surely you know about that. Yeah. So any thoughts from you, Matt?
I guess, I'm every pitch I see these days, that one way or another has AI in it. They don't necessarily need to talk about it anymore because it's understood that they're going to process the information as quickly as possible, and they're going to utilize it, the intelligence that they gain from the algorithms and from the information to advance the idea and advance the concept as quickly as possible for the benefit of humanity, hopefully. And so I think it's going to make us faster, smarter, stronger, healthier, live longer lives. I think, like all things, people were terrified of cars. Cars have killed a lot of people. They've polluted a lot of waterways and roads, and they've done a huge amount of damage. I don't think any of us would want for there not to be cars. And I think that government needs to keep that in mind. I think the only people who can regulate this will be government. And I think somebody said earlier, this is not just a U.S. problem, it's not a New Zealand problem, it's a global problem, and everybody's worried about it. And I don't think anybody should unilaterally start making decisions. I think we need to have a multilateral approach to the use of AI, and people need to get in front of what are the downstream effects that we didn't think about with cars. Let's get ahead of that. But the horse has left the barn. The car is out of the manufacturing facility. So we need to use it as best we can, while also putting in place the precautions we need.
And
Here's an issue with AI that we really need to think hard about is, there's a philosopher who said, do we really want a world where there are no clocks that are wrong? And we live in a world where those kind of mistakes and irregularities are missing. It's a fascinating thing that if you track the word stranger and its use over the last 30 years, young people have largely abandoned the word stranger from their vocabularies because they think of a world that's created in sameness that they can predict. And we certainly see it, the world we know, the epistemology of a world that's on our phone in the same colors, same fonts, same designs, that throughout the globe you actually live in the same temperature and humidity in many places, that the nature of our neighborhoods remain the same. And so what I would argue to New Zealand business, your uniqueness, the idea of an island culture, I think the drag somewhat on productivity means a people-centered ability to be creative and a little bit weird. And those are really essential things, because what students and young people have replaced the word stranger with is someone random, because randomness doesn't fit with the sense of what I know the world to be. We want a world with strangers in them, strangers that we learn to meet and engage with.
Which is what we, for a long time, have called diversity, I think.
Yes.
And it's that concept of diversity and inclusion, actually, not saying, oh, they're strange, but saying, come here, you have different thoughts. I want to bring you back into this concept of productivity, not from the same angle, but I think at the end we need to focus on execution. I mean, there's an aspect of how do you have a good idea, and we talked about the importance of creativity. How do we focus on execution without being too directive and without being the old-fashioned way? Any thoughts?
Execution on?
Delivering, actually, just rather than having great ideas, but how do we execute, especially on hard change, hard plans, hard blueprint?
Yeah, so I'm going to channel Indra Nui a little bit now here. You know, I can tell you as an investor, there's always this push-pull and tug-of-war a little bit of short-term profitability and long-term sustainability of your business. And as a large institutional investor, and Indra being the CEO and former CEO and chairman of Fortune 50 company, PepsiCo, she was pushed by many large investors to focus on short-term profitability and her whole performance with purpose initiative across the entire business globally. She was way ahead, I would say, an early pioneer on this ESG focus that a lot of investors have, you know, environmental, social governance, way before it was ever termed that, and I think in many ways that's more of a marketing term for the investment business, shame on us, than you know, the actual fundamentals of it. But I think to myself, you know, what's the E, the S, and the G? And to me, that's what any good investor should think about, right? It's just, why wouldn't you want to own and invest in businesses who care about the environment, right? Because for the long term, that's better profitability. Yes, it's risk mitigation, but it's improved profitability, and over time your business will do better. The S, and that, by the way, the E, I think, is much easier to measure. Climate, carbon, how much do you take out of the atmosphere? The S, why wouldn't you want to own businesses and invest in businesses that treat their people well? And a lot of the S is in, you know, has diversity, equity, and inclusion in it. But that's harder to measure, so most people don't, right? And then the G is, why wouldn't you want to own businesses and invest in businesses that focus on good governance? Right, they have diverse people on their boards, across senior leadership teams, because you get better decision-making and over time, better investment returns. But these are all long-term type thinking, right? Over the long term, though, we all do better. Communities do better. And then if you get down to the profits, you generate more profits over the long term. But it is that tug of war. And I sort of feel like it's easy to hide behind, well, it's either hard to measure, I don't really know how to do it, so throw up your hands in the air and just say, it's too hard. Well, one of the reasons why I joined Morgan Stanley Investment Management 4 years ago was, one, to invest in lots of diverse entrepreneurs, lots of diverse investment managers, but importantly, to focus on the S. We actually did a study, and here's where research, institutions, and business came together. So Morgan Stanley and one of our investment teams did a study with Harvard Business School recently. And we tried to look at culture and the impact of business cultures on business profitability and investment returns over long periods of time. And it's really fascinating because, again, we get at the S, hard to measure culture. How do you measure that? How do you quantify that in terms of generating better business profitability and investment returns? So this team, this is where AI, machine learning came into play, looked at millions and millions of employment records across over 2,000 publicly traded companies over the last 12 years. And in times of high volatility, particularly during COVID time, those businesses that kept their people, that retained their people, outperformed on profitability and outperformed on investment returns relative to the index. And that's just really fascinating, again, but trying to quantify it helps us, I think, get our hands around it. And you can do it, we can do it, but I think too many of us still are falling back on, well, it's hard to do, it's hard to measure.
Yeah. Tom, did you have any thoughts on the same, on how do we actually affect execution?
Look, I'll come back to the idea that education is going to have to, that execution is going to have to depend, as Seema was saying, delivering for young adults and workers what they want. There's so much for them. The Prime Minister said this morning he had 14-year-olds in Chicago coming to say they really wanted to learn how it was to be a CEO. Well, in our current environment, 4 years later, they're going to come into your office and say, well, I should be the CEO really fast. There is a flatness now to the expectations of younger people in the workforce, far less hierarchy, and for good or ill, that's what people are going to have to respond to.
Yeah. Simon, do you want to go to questions? We have a few questions there.
Yeah, and perhaps just to pick up something you said yesterday, Tom. I think you talked about New Zealand being, quote, I think I've got you right, small and eccentric. And today you've said weird. Now, some might be offended by that. I'm being serious. I think I get you and I like what you're saying. Expand on that for us. And I suppose it might be a question all of you might want to reflect on. Give us some free consultancy here, either as a country, New Zealand, how we position ourselves, but also as businesses, as we're looking to expand offshore, including into the United States.
Well, look, first of all, I'd just like to say that the first 8 days I've had here have been extraordinary, and there's an openness to people everywhere you go, from taxi drivers to everyone. And that kind of openness clearly speaks to how this country is, as Peter Jackson said, it's not a small country, it's a big village. And so part of what has failed in so much of the rest of the developing world is a sense of community. The loneliness is at the highest percentages ever in modern recorded time. There's an explosion of that. In a country that has the connectedness to the outdoors and the sense of community that exists here, I think that is a real strength that can be everybody taking some responsibility for everyone else. Last night I was talking with some people at the dinner about how the new government's going to change education. It has a 10-point plan that a number of people are going to do. And all I would say with that, because again, it's a small country with big issues, is you want to go into that less with ideology about what's wrong, then with a sense of experimentation and testing, just like you would have in business about what might be right. And you can try lots of different ways of making those new things happen. You can be far more nimble here. And I would encourage New Zealand to take those risks.
And the other panelists here, any thoughts on positioning us as a nation, or indeed as some of the businesses, Matt, you've seen?
Yeah, so I was with, similarly at dinner last night, I was with I think the head of Spark. And he was saying that they went to Tel Aviv 6 years or so ago. There was
Simon Mutter, yeah.
Yeah, there was a delegation that went over there, and they came back with a set of recommendations, one of which was, I think it helped get NZGCP started and a bunch of other initiatives to support the innovation in the venture capital ecosystem. But the fact that they were able to do that speaks to how interconnected the business community is with the local and the federal government. And the fact that the Maori people are here and they're so prominently a part of the community here, I think it is incredibly encouraging. And the fact that you have your new prime minister is a hard-nosed business person. I think he mentioned execution like 5 times or something like that in his talk.
As cabinet ministers are worried, he means literally, right? It's too early in the term for that.
Yeah, so I think y'all are in a very positive position. You're poised for another leveling up, and I'm extremely optimistic about what I've seen so far and the amount of capital coming in. And I go back to how much capital is available for companies, and I said this yesterday, but and our topic is unleashing ambition. That we met a company, Mint, which is taking precious metals out of circuit boards, and they've raised, I think, $50 million, and they haven't made, they've got one small pilot plant which isn't yet productive, but they're able to raise a ton of money to pursue their ambitions, and that is partly a function of government policies and the entrepreneurial community here in the country working together. So, this is an exciting time, I think, for New Zealand.
Simon, can I actually interrupt with another question for the panel? We also keep hearing that there's a tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand, and that people actually don't like to celebrate success. So first question is, do you think that's an obstacle to unleashing our ambition, and what do we do about that? And Seema, maybe you can start with your thoughts about, because it is also particularly hard for minorities to celebrate success and to kick out this tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah, so it could be, it's, in the US, I think Fred was talking about this on the earlier panel, this sense of executing and winning and doing well and ambition and drive, and maybe we push it a little too far in the US. But I mean, I think when I've been speaking with thousands of young people, in the last 8 years, and in particular, and they, that's exciting. And to feel a bigger part of something, to feel like you're contributing to growth, that's a good thing. And I think celebrating that is important. I also think it is how a country like New Zealand can keep talent here, and even while they may go abroad and study, they will come back when they see, the kind of growth that has been happening and certainly could be unleashed, like you said, Matt, in the title of the panel. And that can be with capital inflows, whether it's the U.S. investing here. I mean, I can just tell you that Morgan Stanley and one of our infrastructure investment teams made an investment, closed on it a year ago here in New Zealand with a ferry company called Straight New Zealand, which connects the North Island and the South Island on the Cook Strait. And why did we do that? Well, we saw, as we've all talked about today, that the resources here in this country, I mean, it's part of the value creation that we saw was in improving their low-carbon operating model. And already 80% of the electricity here in New Zealand comes from renewable sources, and that's very exciting, I can tell you, to U.S. investors. So I would just say that particularly for the younger talent, it's exciting to be a part of growth. And I would not be shy about that, and I would celebrate that.
So I'd just like to follow up a second on that. You know, ambition is a great thing, but there are different models of what ambition can be. And it could be a whole fistful of poppies standing up rather than, excuse me, just one. I want to tell a little story about when I led the Fulbright Scholars Program. Part of the Fulbright Scholars Program is young people out of college going from the United States around the world and from other countries like New Zealand to the United States. You can get smart young people that you give some money to and a year of freedom to that. You'll get extraordinary people, and there's so many stories of that. The second part of the Fulbright program is for experts in their fields to go to different countries. And I noticed in the first 6 months of traveling to different countries, why do we have a lot of Americans who are not the best in their fields, quite honestly, doing this? You saw a lot of people who were, what's your field of study? I'm an Americanist, which, first of all, I don't even quite know what that means. But, so I convened some gatherings to ask a number of our brilliant scientists, researchers, and business leaders, why would you never, or haven't you applied for, or you've turned down a Fulbright Scholar? And the reason was because we still had a program focused on individuals going rather than groups and teams. And we worked to begin to change a number of those things, but that's the ambition that's exciting. And it's an ambition that is actually far more gender inclusive. You know, there's an Irish saying about, and it's a risk I have all the time, an open mouth really invites a closed fist. And so, you know, when we have a more collaborative sense of engagement and ambition, it's a different story. And I think that's what we'll look to.
Matt, any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned the Irish piece, because both Tom and I are Irish American, I presume. And Ireland has been known for 100 years as being the land where tall poppies. So maybe it's part of the cultural background that we share. But I also think that one of my experiences having been here and talking to people is when I ask. When people introduce themselves who've been quite successful, they'll start by talking about their parents. And the conversation we had yesterday, they started off with questions. Tell me about your background and how your childhood impacted your ambitions today. That was actually the question that they asked. And I've been talking with people about how interesting it is to me that people talk about their parents and they're giving, they're passing off their successes, the success of their parents or their grandparents. It's a very New Zealand, it's an extremely Kiwi thing. It does not happen in America. And it is exactly what Tom said. It's because in America we celebrate individualism. And in America we celebrate, what I did. And people don't talk about, how their parents put them in a position, even though that's even more true there than it is here. And it's just a culture, it's a cultural norm. And I think it's something, and I agree with Tom, it's something to be celebrated. So, fine. So people, want the community to do better. I think that's it's part of the mindset of the Kiwis, and it's probably, one of the things that keep people here so closely linked.
I'm sure it has something to do with this perceived negative of a tall poppy syndrome, what you've said, Tom, or Peter Jackson has said about New Zealand as a village, and that smallness and that sense of, not being above those around you. I've got a question for you, which is different, but I think related. You are prominent, highly successful Americans. When you look at America today, what do you see as the right things and the wrong things about your, most prominent of nations?
So there's something Tocqueville said in his tour of America, and there is something to be said for outsiders looking in at cultures. And he wrote that America isn't any more enlightened or skilled than any other country, but what its genius is to learn from and pick up from its failures. That sense of a forward motion of, we'll correct it. We'll look for another answer. We'll have that future, that there's a sense of keep moving forward. I think that's a value that we still have. The problem we really face now is that's working for fewer and fewer people. There's such a large group of people who easily get left behind. Just the nature of how our economy grows and where the wealth happens. We have, people were talking about very eloquently yesterday about what we took for granted, the ability to get a job easily, to plan to buy a house, to pay off your student loans. I think mine were at 2% interest. The ability to do all that is at a bit of a standstill in our society. And so we're going to have to address a more inclusive sense of achievement and success.
Yeah, I would just add to that in a lot of ways, I feel like in the U.S. that there's this sense of, we talk a lot about, opportunity to do anything. The entrepreneurial spirit. I can say that for my own family. Mom and dad went to the U.S. and they came to the land of opportunity, and it really was that, to just build. You have an idea, you can build something. I think that's pretty infectious, and that, look at Silicon Valley. You look at all the entrepreneurship in the U.S. that you just believe it's possible. Just that idea of believing that it's possible, that's pretty driving. It's pretty exciting and important. And I go back to a story I was sharing yesterday with somebody, and it's about sport. So when I was a little girl, I wanted to play baseball, and I went on to play softball throughout college, and Inder and I share that when she played cricket and I played softball. But girls weren't allowed to play Little League baseball in Connecticut, where I grew up back then. And yet I had to get older to be able to play softball, and I really wanted to play. And my father, I told him this, and so he went to our mayor's office. And he says to them, I came here because America is the land of opportunity, and you're telling my daughter that she can't play Little League baseball? That doesn't make any sense to me. You need to change this. And so I became the first girl to ever play Little League baseball. I became the pitcher. I ended up being one of the best players on the team. And then lots of other girls, ended up playing Little League baseball. And I share that just because, again, I grew up believing that anything was possible, and that is an incredible gift, I think. And so, I often think about our country that way, and I like to think about it that way anyway.
Yeah, so I've enjoyed reading the newspapers here. I think your journalists actually do a good job, and Jack last night was terrific. A deep sense of inquiry and commitment to challenging politicians. And I'm deeply concerned about the demise of the free press in the United States. I think the number of investigative journalists in America has dropped off dramatically. I think the drive towards profit is having a big impact. And I'll tell you, as somebody who went from private sector to government, when I first got there, everybody would say, well, what would happen if we do this? What's the press going to say? Now people don't say that anymore because there are no investigative journalists left in Connecticut, and that's a concern, and it's something that I think every free democracy needs to be very jealous of, is protecting the fourth estate. I also think it's shocking in America. There's a party that doesn't want the IRS, which chases down people who are tax cheats. The fact that they don't want the IRS to be healthy to go after the dollars, because every dollar we put into it, we get back fivefold. I don't know anything about the status here in New Zealand, but if you look around the world, the countries where people pay taxes, and it's really simple for people to collect taxes, it's really important that everybody pay their fair share. And we have a former president who we could talk about whether or not he or she paid taxes. But I think keeping those pieces in place, free press. I don't understand why in the U.S. you can't just vote as easy as you can, do anything else on your phone. I don't get that. And those are the things that I think New Zealand hopefully is thinking about as well.
I think, and I'm going to let you go, Tom, but I think your comment, Matt, around the free press in the United States and New Zealand is the most visible proof I've ever had that the grass is always greener on the other side. But with a few exceptions, Fran. Tom.
So I'd kind of like to end on a note a little bit more optimistic in some of the values we clearly share in New Zealand and America. When I led the Fulbright program, I sat in on a number of interviews that were done for candidates. And I was in Beijing for 2 days to watch how candidates came in. And one of the big values of the Fulbright is that you don't just go to study, you go to engage in the community and bring the whole experience of New Zealand back to America or those countries to America. And so people were asked in this interview, Chinese kids, well, what are you going to do in your free time? And 201 people said, they looked really baffled, and they said, well, I'll study some more if I have any free time. And then later in the afternoon, a very tall Chinese kid came in and said, well, I just love basketball. And so in my free time, I'm going to go to the Chinese American community in Los Angeles and get these kids to play basketball. And you could just see in a moment, that guy's going to be a Fulbright scholar. I mean, there was such joy in the room. The next day, 2 people in a row, we asked, so what are you doing? Well, I'm going to teach basketball. And so, I think we have a sense in both our cultures, New Zealand and the United States, of openness to communities, a sense of work-life balance, a sense that the values are really hard work, but hard work in a whole life scheme and not just one aspiration. And I think that will do us both really well going forward.
I see Silvana's about to pounce, and we're almost out of time, but Matt started the politics, so I'm going to ask you one naughty question that Greg asked Fred, and Fred was obliging, and if you want to pass, you're welcome. What are your predictions around the United States election in 2024?
Me? Biden all the way. I think, and if, there's a slight possibility that Nikki Haley is his opponent, which would make things really interesting and would make for a much more interesting candidacy, I think, than having 2 octogenarians running against each other in America.
It's an amazing thing when your presidential candidates make Winston Peters look young and sprightly.
Gosh.
Journalists in the room. Tom?
Look, I hope and pray and am working very hard for the president to get reelected, but I would say that even, God willing he does, there's a brokenness in American politics that we really still have to address. Fred and Greg were talking about it a little bit earlier, but and certainly the idea of a free and robust media is relevant to that, but it is something all of us have to look at, and I think this sense of needing simple answers in difficult time, the ability and desire to demonize someone as at fault for these things, those are issues that are they go back to demagoguery and populism all all over, but there's a new speed with which those happen, and misinformation can be spread. And so I think it's really going to behoove us as a country to reach across the aisle and get to know people as citizens again, to rebuild something. And it may be that we've had to come to such a bad extreme to pick ourselves up. And
I would
Seema,
just
you
want
have
to
10
add.
seconds.
Okay, I just would add, I think Biden also, and I would say, of course, I'm hopeful that's the case too, but I think when Americans go to the polls, ultimately, that this is again a vote, in my view, the second time around, about the state of democracy. And at the end of the day, I just can't imagine that Americans are going to go to the polls and vote against it, which I think you would be if you look at the other candidate, who will likely be the candidate. We don't know. Nikki Haley may surprise us, but I would say it's a vote on democracy, and I just think we as Americans will vote that way.
stay tuned.
Yes.
Now, this is starting to get really interesting again on a different topic, but we ran out of time, and we were incredibly privileged to have you three, and you, Simon, in the panel. But I want to say it has been fascinating.
I feel like a real victim of a tall poppy syndrome right there.
It does feel like we had a range of topics on the table. I think there is a clear message for all of us in New Zealand that we can take control of our own destiny. And I think that is actually a meaningful message. And also be proud and, don't underestimate how much we can achieve in a nimble little country. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for your contribution. It has been fantastic. Thank you.
Just before you go, I just want to do a personal thank you to our panellists that we've had in from the United States. So thank you very much, Seema. It's been a real pleasure to have you here, and I know we've got some more time with you. Matt, thank you. Tom and Fred, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, Indra couldn't be here. But Fran, to be able to use this talent as we have, I think has just been immense. And so once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.